Good evening and welcome. This is the Saratoga Springs Planning Commission meeting. We have an empty house tonight. It is Thursday, January 23rd, 2020. We will start with a Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Ryan and then proceed to roll call.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, let's start with, well, we have a full Planning Commission meeting. Our full Planning Commission, everyone's present. Our names are in the minutes, and apparently staff also has their names in the minutes, so we can just proceed forward. We will do that. And proceed to item number 3, which is public input time. There is no one from the public here tonight, so we will close. We do have somebody from the public. Oh, still the public? Do you have anything that you'd like to contribute to item number 3? Okay, we will close public input and move right on to item number 4. This is a public hearing for the Parks and Trails Master Plan Amendment. It is city initiated. I will turn the time over to the city at this time. Mr. Johnson.
So tonight we have Lisa with Landmark Design here, who we contracted with to make the updates to the Parks and Trails Master Plan, and she'll be presenting.
And it's Lisa?
Lisa,
Is that
yes.
correct? Lisa, please, either, I would recommend sitting at the table. And the time is yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present the draft plan to you tonight. We'll hit the highlights tonight. I know it's a large document.
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, it is.
You might have to speak pretty directly into it. We are broadcasting to the, 2.5 people on YouTube. So.
Okay. Doesn't look like it's advancing.
That's why I was saying make sure it is the on switch one.
Oh, on this. Let's see. That always helps.
It's on the side.
There we go. We'll try that. There we go. Okay. So the draft plan builds upon your existing planning documents, and it establishes new goals and objectives for the future. This document provides a planning direction for a 10-year period and beyond. We look to build out as well. And then it provides specific priorities and implementation strategies. The plan is divided into 6 chapters: parks and open space, recreation, community events and arts, trails, priorities and costs, and then the plan wraps up with goals and policies. This graphic summarizes the public involvement throughout the planning process. And we had a pretty robust planning, a public engagement process. We had a technical committee that provided us with guidance throughout the planning process. We have a web page that it's been live throughout the process, and that is still live, and we're still receiving comments through that web page. We conducted focus interviews, several public meetings. We recently had a public open house just a week and a half ago, I believe, and we had a pretty good turnout to that meeting. We also had an online tool called Social Pinpoint that we engaged with the public, and then we had a survey. And even though the survey wasn't a statistically valid survey, we received over 2,000 responses from that, which is pretty impressive for just an optional survey. The top priorities that came out of the survey were recreation center and pool, lakefront beach, and walking and biking trails. The number one reason for using a park is the close proximity to home. The most needed parks or recreation facilities, again, the rec center, splash pad, lakefront beach, and specialty parks, which would include like dog parks or skate parks. And then you had over 46% of the survey respondents participated in your recreation programs within the last 12 months. Over 64% use your trails at least a few times a year, so you have a really significant trail use. And then there's only a small percentage of residents that are dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with the city's overall provision of parks, recreation and trails. So you guys are doing a really good job overall, providing those facilities. And then we asked several questions about the willingness to pay for different facilities. And residents or survey respondents were willing to pay up to $38 a year to improve existing parks and facilities, to pay $49 a year for new facilities, and then up to $139 per year for a recreation center. And there's a lot more detail on the survey if you want to get into the appendix and dig into some of those questions and results. So Social Pinpoint, you guys are one of the guinea pigs for us. This is a new program that we are using, an online engagement tool that lets the members of the public click on these markers and drag them to a location on the map of the city, and they can provide a location-specific comment. They can upload photos and provide us links, any other feedback through that. The map on the upper left just shows those markers distributed throughout the city, and the lower map is just a hotspot diagram showing the areas of the city that received the most comments in red. You know, a lot of the concerns mirrored what we saw in the survey. The residents wanted specialty parks, unique playgrounds. People talked about more open space and less development. They want to see the Marina Park improvements completed. Again, the rec center and pool, and then also safer trail crossings and some off-street trails. We took a look at your demographics. That just helps us plan to see where you're at now and then plan out into the future what you're going to need to keep up the pace on your parks and recreation. And right now, you're just under 40,000 people, and you're going to nearly triple by 2060. At the approximate build out. So you'll be adding another 172% of your population. Saratoga is younger than the county, the state, and the nation. None of this is a surprise to you guys, I'm sure. You have more children under 18 than the county, the state, and the nation. You guys are getting younger, though, and that's something that's a little unique. A lot of other communities, most other communities in Utah, even though they have a lot of children, they're gradually aging. And you also have an increasing household size, which is unique because a lot of other communities, even in Utah County, are gradually decreasing. So that has implications on the types of facilities that you'll need to be providing in the future. We took a quick glance at all of your park facilities. Overall, you have 335 total acres of parks and recreation land that contribute to meeting your residents' needs. And we got into detail on a lot of the other individual amenities, which you can see here, and also took a look at your open space. This map shows your existing parks and open space. And we also did a really detailed inventory of all of your parks, including individual amenities and quantities, and notes about any items that are coming in the future. And this also includes special use parks, like your mountain bike trail park, the RC airplane park, and then the hot springs, which are, not owned by the city. So we take a look at your parks and we divide those out by acreage, typically, and so you end up with 4 park types in the city: pocket parks, neighborhood parks, community parks, and regional parks. And those are typically categorized by acreage. So pocket parks are your smallest parks at 3 acres and less. Neighborhood parks are 3 to 10 acres. Community parks are generally 10 to 30 acres, and regional parks are 30 plus. And this, you have over 136.9 acres that contribute to your total park area ratio, and I'll get into this in a minute. But what we do is we include in this total parks that you guys own and that you have full control over. So we don't include county-owned parks in this. We don't include special use parks because they meet really specific needs, like the bike park. Or sometimes if you had a pay-to-play facility, we would not include that in this. We also don't include private parks or other land that is maintained by the city in this calculation. So the park area ratio gives us a kind of a baseline of where you're at today. So we take the acreage of your total parks and divide that by your current population and multiply that by 1,000. And that tells us how many acres per 1,000 people you have in the city right now. And right now, Saratoga has 3.72 acres per 1,000. And just to let you know, that's pretty comparable to what we're seeing in most most communities in the region. It's hard to make direct comparisons per se. We do provide a chart in the plan, if you've seen that. Some communities add in a lot more facilities than we typically would recommend adding in. You know, they might add, like if they are next to a canyon, they might add some of the open space they have up there. But generally, we try to be pretty specific about what we include in our level of service. And in the other plans that we've done recently, you're definitely comparable to other growing communities like Harriman and some of those. So distribution analysis, this helps us look beyond just your total park acres and get a sense of how parks are laid out in the city, and are there areas of residential housing that aren't served by parks. And so we assign a different service radius to each park type based on how likely somebody is either to walk to that park or possibly to drive to that park. So pocket parks have a 1/4 mile service radius, neighborhood parks have a 1/2 mile radius, and then regional and community parks have a 1 mile radius. And I'll show you the map in a second, and according to this analysis, there are 3 distribution gaps in the city at present. So this map shows all of the parks, and they have that radius applied to them. We also kind of cut off the radius when you have a major barrier, like a major roadway that people might not walk to on foot. So this map shows where those gaps fall. They're in the south end of the city, generally around the golf course and on the west side of Redwood Road. When it comes to filling those gaps, that's something that we try to recommend that you work on as soon as you can. The challenge comes in that some of these areas don't have available land for development to create new parks. So we have to rely on other resources to meet those needs. And in the case of Gap 1, there are some private parks in that area, and that area also has access to open space. And SITLA is conceptually planning a park in the general area that the service radius of that should help serve this gap area. And then Gap 2, we're also recommending that the access to the open space and the lake and the trails that are associated with that can help meet those needs. We realize that it's not a traditional park, but in some cases you just don't have an option based on what's already in place. And Gap 3 down at the south end will be filled with the construction of Performance Park. And this map shows the distribution when you develop all of the parks that were recommended for the city, the parks that the city is already planning on implementing, and also a few recommended parks that we have added to this to ensure that the distribution will be across the board in the future as much as possible. Looking to the future, this is kind of a soul search for any city to figure out what you want to be in the future. Some communities are okay with continuing the park area ratio that they have into the future. Some, it's going to drop no matter what because they have so much development in, and often as you see a community mature, it's hard to maintain that ratio. And some communities have a desire to really push and become a recreation-centric community, and they'll actually raise it. And so even though this plan recommends continuing 3.72 into the future, you can always go beyond that if you want to. This is kind of the baseline of what you need to continue that level of service that you have now. Your residents are generally satisfied with the job that you're doing now. And so this kind of gives you a starting point. Looking to meet needs by 2028, actually, that should say 2030, you will need 41.8 acres. And this is this can be a combination of city parks and developer parks. And that's on top of that 31 acres that are needed to fill those gaps. And by 2060, you need 189.9 acres to meet needs. And something to keep in mind as you move into the future is that Land never gets cheaper, so if you can acquire land now, and even if you have to sit on it for a number of years before you can develop it, we definitely recommend that. We did that with Taylorsville City when they were first starting out. We recommended that they just buy their parkland, and they actually ended up bonding for that. As a young city, somehow they were able to afford that, and so they bought up all of the parkland that was recommended at that time, and those lots sat vacant for a long time, but they were really pleased that they had done that they didn't been able to achieve that because they saved so much in their land costs, their land acquisition costs. This chart summarizes the proposed city parks and proposed developer parks, and also some parks that we are recommending. That last line there, proposed neighborhood parks, those are parks that we're recommending to help fill those distribution gaps. So right now there's 271.7 acres of currently proposed parks. And if all of these develop, then you'll have 9 acres surplus. But again, those are needed for distribution. So you'll have a little extra, but you need those for distribution. The plan establishes park standards. So for all 4 of the park types, it talks about the general size and the minimum amenities that are recommended for each of these. And I just want to stress that this isn't intended to say that each park should be developed to look the same. This is kind of the baseline, and we always recommend that you work with the local community to try and create unique parks, and that's something that came out of the survey too, is that people want to see more unique kind of themed parks. In addition to looking at park acreage and distribution, we also look at the amenities within each park, and overall we establish whether you have a deficit or a surplus of amenities within the city, and part of that comes out of the park standards. If a neighborhood park should have a sports court, that kind of feeds into this calculation. And then we also establish a recommendation based on population, and we typically start with kind of national and regional standards, but then we adjust those to the unique needs of Saratoga and what you guys are finding and where you're seeing pressure, what sort of facilities you need. And so this study found that you are short about 4 multi-purpose fields, and then also a sand volleyball court, a skate or a bike park, and then a splash pad or a water feature. We looked at open space, and you have over 84 acres of existing open space, and definitely hopes to secure much more than that in the future. And open space, we don't assign a ratio like you do with parks, because it's typically secured on an opportunistic basis. But when you can secure this open space, we definitely recommend that you prioritize parcels that are going to expand your existing open space, kind of expand that connection, preserve natural drainages, habitat, any other sort of natural features, and open space that'll help with that connection of your networks, connecting your parks and your neighborhoods, and also any regional or city destinations. The plan also discusses a little bit about potential unique uses for some of the open space. We're seeing that as a trend definitely along the Wasatch Front, where communities are exploring unique facilities like maybe bike parks or kind of hillside climbs or archery courses, that sort of thing. So Harriman has a great plan that talks about some of these uses called the Harriman Hills Open Space Plan, if you want to look at that for some references. Additional suggestions for the park system. So implementing those minimum park standards, developing the specialty parks, upgrading any parks that are aged or that lack amenities, and then developing a wayfinding and signage master plan. And I think this would be very helpful, because as we were taking our tour with city staff, some of the parks, they're like, well, some people call it this and some people call it that, and so kind of helping establish that identity of your city can contribute to some of the branding efforts that you guys are already making, and just make sure that people that want to use the facilities know about them, or people that may not have realized they're there, just to let them know what you actually have, because you guys do have a lot in place already. Recreation, you have an amazing set of recreation programs already. And the survey did come out with a few requests for additional programs. So I guess if Heston has more time on his hands, he can expand those programs, and part of it is a space constraint as well. You know, you guys are definitely making the best use of what you have access to right now. And you have a great variety of community events that are well attended and very popular. And your arts programs are also very active. So recommendations for this section include conducting a feasibility study for that rec center / community center. You know, a lot of communities are trying to make sure that these facilities are as flexible as they can. So being able to accommodate not just recreation, but also to help meet other community needs. That is definitely something to consider as you move forward with that. Exploring partnerships for the construction and operation of these major recreational facilities. You guys in Utah County are a little bit of a disadvantage compared to Salt Lake County. You know, the county up there provides a lot of these larger facilities, and so down in Utah County, you guys are left to provide those yourselves or to maybe partner up to provide some of those. But I would definitely recommend exploring those relationships and seeing what you know, if you can make anything happen that way to kind of pool your resources. We see that happening up in Park City a lot. They have a lot of interlocal agreements where Park City, Snyderville Basin Rec District, and the school district go in together on facilities, or you know, one will pay for construction and the other contributes to maintenance. But that way, everybody gets, you know, to access to the facility, and not just one agency is stuck with paying for those facilities. Trails, you guys have over 36 miles of paved trails, over 5 miles of unpaved trails, over 11 miles of bike lanes, and a few miles of motorized trails. This map shows your existing trails, and these are your paved and unpaved and motorized. Because your network is pretty extensive, we felt it was easier to show them separately. This map shows your bike lanes. And then this shows the proposed network, which is a massive change. This map also shows the locations of proposed trailheads and also recommended crossings, whether it's signals or separated crossings. So a lot to consider here. So it's a total of 127 paved trails proposed, over 14 miles of proposed unpaved trails, and then over 50 miles of bike lanes. And this map just shows your proposed bike lanes. And one thing that I do want to mention here is that before our open house, Dave Stroud mentioned to us that there were a couple of small trail segments that he wanted to add. So we'll be adding another 1.6 miles of paved trails to the plan. And then out of that meeting, we found a segment of bike lane that we would like to add as well. So that'll be another 1.1 miles of bike lane that will be added to these. This map just shows the distribution of your trailheads and also shows a quarter-mile buffer on all of your trail corridors. So you can see that the city is pretty well covered with this future trail network. That doesn't mean that you can access from everywhere along that trail corridor, but that, that generally shows that people are within a certain distance of a trail. The plan establishes trail standards. So for all of the trail types, we give the recommended width, the materials, the maximum grade, and also the user groups that are allowed. And I should mention that this plan does not recommend equestrian use on any of the paved trails, just because you're rapidly growing and rapidly urbanizing, and as you're going to have a lot of user conflicts, and how do you get horses safely through the city and through some of those crossings. It was felt, and we had discussions with some of the equestrian community, and they said that they typically just trailer their horses anyways. If they're going to do any riding, they'll just load up and go to where they want to go. They don't typically want to ride from their arena or anything like that. So the plan also shows trail sections for all of the different trail types to see what that looks like. It establishes trailhead standards as well. So there are 3 recommended trailhead standards, three trailhead types, and this just talks about how many parking stalls are in each of those, whether they're paved, unpaved, and what other facilities might be included with that. And then the plan goes through, and I believe there are 15 proposed trailheads, and it gives the details on each one of those, what standard of a trailhead is it, what type of facilities would be included, and what the user groups are targeted for each of those. So additional trail recommendations, if you have significant trail conflicts, also exploring the idea of user-specific trails, like some communities have done, like bike-specific trails or even directional trails. Again, wayfinding and signage, this is key to integrate trails into this as well. Not just your parks, but also your trails. Who's allowed, what type of uses are allowed on each trail, and again, just tying into that branding and identification for the city. And then also, we are recommending just a separate study, whether this is by staff, to explore motorized trail use, just because that's a very specific user group, and I think the city needs to think about what, you guys need to think about what you want to do with that in the future, what direction you want to go. Coming down to the parks, or the cost for all of these facilities, this is where it all adds up fast. So this first chart shows the cost to upgrade all of your existing parks to meet those standards, and like the amenities, LOS, to fill your existing gaps, and then to meet your needs by 2030 and by 2060. So this is through build out, and this is just in today's dollars though. So the total for just the parks component is over 48 million. Yeah, through 2060. And then this is for the trail network to build that out, and that is over 76 million. So that includes, so I should point out that this doesn't include bike lanes on here, because the assumption is that with your bike lanes, they'll be built out with your roadway projects, and it'll kind of be tied into that budget.
That caveat's in the plan, right?
Pardon?
That disclaimer's in the plan?
Yes.
About that
Yeah.
cost? Okay.
Yeah, and it's in the little footnote right under there, and that is in the plan, yeah. And then this also includes the costs for some of the crossings and potential lighting and safety improvements. This could be, adding restrooms to trailheads, or lighting, or if you have specific trails that may need lighting, that the community is behind lighting certain areas, you could do that. This is also the cost for those new trailheads. And then this is the total cost for the parks, the trails, and also a wayfinding and signage master plan and the installation. So that brings the grand total to over $125 million. We also typically recommend establishing an annual budget to help with amenity replacement, just so that you don't get behind on your deferred maintenance. Making sure that if a piece of playground equipment needs to be replaced, that sort of thing, that you have kind of a budget that you can work towards that. So the plan takes all of these detailed items and assigns it over the 60-year period when it's recommended to take place. And some of these just happen throughout the process, and some of them will take that long to achieve, and some just happen within a small period within that. So there's several large charts in there summarizing all those action items. And then the plan wraps up with all of these goals, and those are just the overriding goals for each of the chapters, about ensuring that you have access to parks, and, ensuring your standard of maintenance remains high, those sorts of things. And also a goal in there about integrating water conservation measures, just to make sure that you're using your resources wisely. And then also just having an aesthetically pleasing community too. There were some survey questions about the appearance of the community, and so we wanted to make sure we included a goal that related to that. And that is the summary of the plan. Do you have any questions?
Thank you for that summary. Is there anything that staff wants to add? Mr. Johnson?
Nothing too specific, other than the impetus for doing this update. Actually, when she mentioned the equestrians, was because equestrians had approached me concerned about where they are and are not allowed to use. We didn't have any kind of signage. Residents were getting on them, saying the city said they couldn't use it, and the city was saying we never said such a thing. So that's kind of the purpose of that. Our intention was to have a variety of uses for that, but we made it a point to make sure Landmark spoke with the equestrian centers, because I feel like they represent the equestrian community, and they're the ones that said, no, we would prefer to trailer our horses, take them to a trail rather than take the paved trails that lead to the unpaved trails. So that recommendation is actually based off of the equestrian community's response to us, just as a clarification.
I just want to point to that though. The parking for the equestrians when they trailer, especially Israel Canyon, we need to consider. Because we do have to trailer, but the parking is terrible for a lot of those spots along the
And
mountain.
that's part of the recommendation here, is that we need to address some of those trailheads and those things to make those accommodations. So I think that point is completely valid, and that's the intent of doing this. Okay, so we see we have this equestrian community, what things do we need to plan ahead for to address those sorts of things? And there's other things, not equestrian related, like the recreation center and, questions about dog parks and a variety of things. But yeah, that's the intent of this, is to provide that guiding document. So when we're ready or have the funding to do such a thing, we know how to go about it.
And the trailheads that are described in the plan, all those proposed trailheads, there are several that are dedicated towards equestrians, so.
Okay, anything else from staff?
No, that's all.
Okay, again, Lisa, thank you for that overview. This is a public hearing. We have a distinguished resident in the house now. We have a single public member. So we will open the public hearing. Honorary President Shelley, if you have a comment, please come. You know the routine. And we're still going to make you give your name and address for the record.
Absolutely. Shelley March, 313 West Strawberry Place. Just a comment on this, and we've talked about this several times, but it's still not on the actual map. So if you look at the proposed trails system, we're missing, and the actual existing, we're actually missing a couple of trails. One of the main ones that we're missing in the existing is on the east side of Redwood Road along Utah Lake Distributing Canal. There is an existing section of trail that is behind the storage units. I didn't see it on the map. Okay, perfect. And then along with that, obviously within the proposed, that needs to be continued out along that trail system. The other part that's missing is we're missing the proposed continuation of the power line corridor trails in a couple of areas. So you'll see it up on the north end, you'll see it in the midsection, but the connection point is missing. So as long as we continue those trails, one of the important things we found out when UDOT came in to do Mountain View Corridor is that because we didn't have those trails specifically called out in continuation on our plans, they flat out refused to help us with that. And so now the city will have to go through and put some of those trails through in order to force them when they do the eventual freeway to do that. So if we can just make sure that those are on there and we've got those continued areas of connectivity, that will help us both with our recreation and then also, of course, with the to some extent, the commuting by active transport, is some of those can be used for cyclists as they're going from one place to the other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. Lisa, you're not off the hook quite yet. So we will close the public hearing at this time, and if staff and or Lisa could respond to those two things that were brought up by the public, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm happy to meet with Shelley and make sure that we have those adjustments to the power line corridor trails.
And so those adjustments are being done and making sure those are through to save the city.
The ones along the canal portion that she mentioned is what Lisa mentioned earlier, they were going to add in later.
And the continuation of that, wherever it's supposed to go.
The power line, I'm not sure, did Dave Stroud mention that to you already, or do we need to?
No, I'm going to get with
Yeah.
Shelley. I'll get with Shelley and make sure that we are
Okay.
showing the complete network that needs to be there.
And that's why Shelley was originally on the technical committee, because we needed her eagle eye. So she could see those things.
Okay. Okay, we'll turn it over to the Planning Commission, and we're going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to throw a wrench and go to Commissioner Barton. Do you have anything?
Yeah, just a few things. Just one thing, actually. So the public open house, was there not one held? I just see that there's a spot for dates and there's no comments or anything like that for that.
Yeah, it was held only a week and a half ago, and so
Oh.
we just haven't updated the plan. We figured we would do one update to the plan. So we had about 30 people turn out for that.
Okay.
Which is actually much higher
It
turnout
is.
than
I
we
know how
had for
these
the
things
public
work,
scoping
right?
meeting. Yeah, it was great. We had some great comments. We had a lot of feedback on the rec center, and we had somebody from the public talk about equestrian access and a few other items like dog parks. Just a good overall
Okay, so you guys will go and update that and add that?
Yes, we're
Okay,
definitely
great.
going to update the plan with that
She
information.
she wants to wait, just to clarify, until after talking to the city council as well, so that
Okay.
can make one update altogether.
Understand,
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's great. That was all I had, was just questions about that.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
Is it my turn?
It is. That's why I said your name.
I didn't buzz in, but I do have some things I want to say. First of all, you talked about these creative ways of which we might partner with neighboring cities or others, since we don't have some of the benefits of Salt Lake County.
Yeah.
I do, maybe I'm speaking to you about this, David, but I live on a park actually up off of Grandview. So if you took a park like Regal View Park and you tapped into the local churches or the local community, I think you could literally, we could build a pavilion which you could pull the residents, they all want it. And if you gave us the materials, we have, from a stone's throw from my house, I get 3 contractors who are certified and insured who would build that thing for free at cost only. And I mean that, like, we live in a very generous community. We live in and the volunteerism and the sense of community we have here, I absolutely think we've got to explore ways to tap it, and I think we might surprise ourselves. With that said, I also think if there was ever a community that certainly that merited a rec center, it'd be this one. Growing younger, growing larger in each household. Like, I don't know where you draw the line, but we're way far away from that in that spectrum, I think. So that's my voice on that. I do have a question about, we talk about like maintaining our parks. We are kind of like the wild, wild west of Utah County when you get out here to Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain. And everyone has ATVs, everyone has dirt bikes. I see those constantly being ridden through parks. And we have, like, I'll take Regal View Park again, because that's where I'm at in my life. But like, you've got signs everywhere that say no dumping. And I'm like, we don't have a dumping problem here. We have tracks running all over that park. It gets disastrous sometimes.
So you're saying ATVs are going on grass parks?
Oh, yeah.
All the time.
Like snow falls, we have a sledding hill there, but we also just have 12 hours a day.
And that may be part of some of the signage that they were talking about?
Totally.
having that
And I'm
wave
saying,
and
like, and if we
signage.
built a pavilion and all of a sudden you're renting it out for $50 a day, first of all, that thing is going to pay itself off in a year and you'll be generating revenue. And in the second year, you can fund all those signs that we need, say no ATVs. I mean, like, I think it'd be a serious revenue source in a 1-year payback period if we tap the volunteerism on that. Sorry, I just spilled. Lastly, sometimes I have a problem with these pocket parks, and maybe because Regal View is only 5 acres instead of 6 acres, it is a pocket park. But like, not all pocket parks are created equal. And you get these builders who come in and like, oh yeah, we got pocket parks, and it adds to this grand total, and I'm like, these are not the same, and how they're maintained or just, I don't know. I just wonder what we do to maintain a quality or standard, and not that we aren't. There's something from park to park, and you can see it up in Grandview. Like, some parks are kind of wasted space, and other parks are highly used, overly used. And then lastly, are these goals that we have up here, are these like ordinally ranked? When you say priorities, first goal, 1, 2, 3, like, are these like, they're just 10 goals, they're all important, we're gonna go after all of them. There's no ordinally rank of what we're gonna go first, second, third?
Yeah, and then that's where the action and implementation plan comes into play. That establishes more of the priority. Let's see, we'll go back. Oh. So that's where this chart comes into play. And it doesn't, it does recommend items that should be looked at for immediate implementation and then over the next, 10-year period and beyond. But it doesn't say, of those items in this column, this one should take priority over that one.
Okay.
Because a lot of that is what opportunities you have that come
Sure.
before you.
Some can be simultaneous and.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm with you. Thanks, that's all I have for now.
Commissioner Kilgore.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Okay, so first I have some general comments, I guess. excuse me, I may be completely wrong as far as this, the planning staff as well as the city's direction or philosophy, but, things like a beach park, I really do think, I'm glad that the residents or the survey response said that beach park is very high up there, and I always thought it should be because that's, rec center, important, yes, dog parks, important, all these other parks, important, but what makes Saratoga Springs different is that we do have a beach, or at least we have water properties where we could develop a beach. And that's one of the things that makes us different, and I'm glad that a lot of people do feel that way. But I do wonder if, as far as how the city would acquire or create those beach parks is not really something that's directed, but rather it's serendipity because say a developer gives us the land, So I guess if the developer gives us the land on the water, then we'll say, oh, great, now we could develop a beach park. But we're not really, and we have a goal to do that, but I just wonder how we actually do that because it's really hard for us to, either secure the land or even though it is a number 2 park goal amongst the residents, excuse me, and it does make us unique and allow us to use the unique properties that we have. So I just wonder if you felt while you're doing interviews and such, if there is some kind of a directed, movement towards that in some way, other than it just fell in our laps because a developer wanted to trade some land for not having to create open space or something, something like that.
Yeah, the Marina Park Master Plan does show, a concept for an expanded beach. And then I'm not familiar with the concept for the North Marina Park, David, but does that have a beach area up there as well?
The North
Marina Park?
I don't recall it having
Does
a
that not
beach
have-
area. I don't believe it does. It's more boat.
Marina?
Yeah, boardwalk, yep.
Okay.
Exactly, yeah.
So I guess part of that is just, again, this is kind of the basic vision, and you guys can take it where you want to take it. You can decide as a community if you want to push for those lakefront beaches, then you can run with that. But this doesn't specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I know, gosh, I forgot something. It's the tuna or the yellowtail sushi yeah, so I know that it's hard. It's hard for us to do that because, again, we don't just take land and, we don't own our own, we don't have a lot of land like that and it's already owned by somebody else. But I just feel that, I wish there was a way where I could feel that the city is directed towards that because there are very few places really left where we could do such a thing. And I know we've identified them. And again, I guess a lot of it is serendipity. We just happen to be able to get the land because the developer needs to trade it for something. But I just wish there's a little bit more of a feeling that we're actually directed towards that because again, it's one of the unique things about Saratoga Springs. We have several unique things, but that's one of them. So anyway, okay, that's just that comment. And then did want to ask a number of questions then. Excuse me. So on page, this is my page. Page 33. So that on the plan is actually on page 14. There's a chart that talks about the demographics of the people who responded and such, and I know it's kind of a small sample, but I wonder how representative those demographics of the survey responders are to the actual city.
I don't think we collected demographic.
We did collect some basic demographics, and that's the challenge that you have with an opt-in survey like this is that we can't control the demographics
Right.
to make sure that it represents the demographics of the community as a whole. And we did find that the survey results were skewed towards female respondents compared to the overall community. And then the majority of respondents were within the 24 to 34 age group. And then over 2/3 of the respondents had 4 or more children in the household. So I think that you can kind of get a sense for, the majority of.
The 4 or more children actually does fit our per household demographic.
Yeah, I thought that,
and some of those things do.
So it does sound like, yeah, at least as far as the household size and
But we
maybe
didn't
even the
collect
youth.
household income or
Yeah, I
anything
fall in the
like
half
that.
Asian atheist.
We might have.
So you don't fit in.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
I'm a
that the
Democrat.
appendix has detailed information on the survey responses if you want to get in there and look at more of the,
Okay.
I think it does actually, it does have a question on household income.
Does it?
It does. And whether you own or rent your home, how long you've lived in the city, your household size, age categories, so gender. So there are some of those types of
Okay.
statistics. You're welcome.
And I mean, I could go back and look at that and kind of put together a little comparison.
Yeah, it's just because, because if the survey is skewed towards a certain demographic, it may not represent the actual, the city. But I guess at least a couple of those is what the city looks like as far as household size and then even the younger side of the city.
And we do actually mention in
Or
the
aspect.
plan that because it's not a statistically valid survey, we can't say this is
Right, right.
representative of the city as a whole. It kind of gives you a snapshot and some general ideas from, over 2,000 people, but that's obviously not, we can't say that represents everybody.
Okay.
So,
What is a spider box?
It's basically for events when you need to plug in, like when we plug in all the equipment, sound equipment, it's not just your
It's like an electrical thing?
standard plug. Yeah, it's an electrical outlet for
Oh,
all the
okay.
huge electrical things for even things, yeah, it's a
Okay.
power box for even things like the carnival and things like
Okay.
that, so.
They
Right.
usually connect into the ground. There's a power line run into the ground and like a sprinkler, and it's plugged into the ground.
Right.
Okay.
And then the power is able to extend out.
So for example, one of the things that my staff talked about is originally when they were doing Shea Park, they were asked, do we need a spider box there? And they thought, oh, we'll never hold big events there. And then we started doing Fall Festival and it blew up way bigger than we ever expected. And we thought, we really should have just put a spider box. Because now to go retrofit it, it's $10,000, which isn't astronomical, but it's $10,000 that we don't have budgeted,
right.
right? And so it's easier to do it when we're building those parks to make sure those things are
Okay.
included in.
Yeah, there's several references to it, and I just couldn't figure it out. I couldn't tell if it was a podium but now it makes sense. It's the utilities, you got to have that, and didn't even think about that. Okay, thank you. For the longest time, even Chris Karn, who was a prior commissioner here, and he ran the HOA in the community I live in, he said that that Eagle Park in Saratoga Springs Development is a city park, and that's why we had to keep some of the gates open and things like that. But it looks like in your thing, it says it's a private park, so maybe we've been wrong all along, or I was wrong in the interpretation, because,
yes, I don't believe.
Yeah, we
honorary-
appreciate you
It's not
opening
on
up the
our-
gates.
But it has mandatory.
yeah, exactly, HOA, but we always heard it was a city park, and so we couldn't close
Very
the-
charitable of you guys to let us use your park.
It's private, but the trailhead is.
That's why they couldn't put gates.
We have some clarification from our honorary resident.
Terrific.
So it's an HOA park, but per the development agreement, when that was developed, the trail access is provided for general public use.
Okay, so it's the trail.
The trailhead, yeah.
That makes sense, okay. All right, thank you. So that's why it wasn't included, I guess. Okay. On page 59, which is, sorry, I just go by the packet. So that's page 40 on in the plan. It says here, in quotes, "Existing development precludes the construction of additional city park." And I was wondering, what does that mean?
Let's see. That's probably a typo.
Oh,
Let me find that.
it was in the distribution analysis.
Let's see.
Dang it, I wish I had marked it, but,
Which paragraph is it in?
oh, wait a minute. I just put the quote and I didn't put the paragraph. Look, the word, there's two, at least
Is the bottom, it looks like there are several proposed parks which help fill these gaps, but since,
There's several proposed parks which will help fill these gaps. But
Since
since existing
existing
development
development
precludes the
construction
construction of additional
Oh, there
city
it is,
parks, less traditional means must be utilized.
yeah, that should be rephrased. We just need to make, basically, I think what we were trying to say there was that there is no available land
Oh, okay,
in those areas. So I'll make a note and
Okay.
we'll fix that.
all right.
Yeah.
And then a couple pages after that, I think.
Commissioner Anderson, do you have a page reference for what you just said?
Last paragraph. Oh, okay. This is more, it's kind of philosophical. On page 42, it says, it talks about how we had a previous PAR of 5.9 acres per 1,000 people, and we didn't meet it, and now we're recommending 3.72. What, if it wasn't met going forward from 2011, what concrete steps by the city need to be taken to meet the new PAR of 3.72 acres per 1,000? Are we doing anything different, or are we just kind of letting it go, however it turns out to be?
Well, so what we find typically is that when you have young cities, if you build a couple of large parks, then you have a really high PAR. And that's typically where that higher PAR comes from. And so, like I said, it tends to trend downward into the upper 2 point something to the 3s, maybe up into the low 4s generally, unless you're really making a very ambitious effort to set yourself apart and go higher than that. Those seem to be the typical ranges that we're seeing. Again, it's more about what your priorities are, what the residents are willing to pay for. Because you have not only the maintenance of your existing parks and facilities, everything that you build, you have not only the cost to build it, but then you also have the cost to maintain it. So it's just a matter of setting your goals and priorities. This kind of gives you all the information you need to, make some decisions moving forward, and you can go beyond what this plan says,
Right.
for sure.
In the analysis, it said if we actually build out to what parks we have planned and things like that, we'll actually have like a surplus compared to the PAR. Is that surplus distributed and of the types, the variety of parks that would be ideal, or do we?
Yeah. And
are we going to get a bunch of neighborhood parks that have few amenities?
Well, the parks that we're generally recommending for to meet distribution needs are neighborhood parks, and those are 3 to 5 acres. And I can't remember if we specifically mentioned it in here. It might be in the discussions with staff in the focus groups, but cities are generally trying to avoid acquiring new pocket parks, anything,
Yeah,
3 acres and less, just because, maintenance nightmare, and they don't provide the value. So at least with neighborhood parks, you at least get a sports court or a pavilion or something, along those along those lines, like a field or a sports park with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're expecting about, I guess maybe it's the same question, about 9 acres of surplus by build out in 2060. But are these parks aligned to what residents want? I guess that's you kind of answered it. We go with what we can. Particularly, we should prioritize beach parks because it's unique to Saratoga Springs. I already mentioned that, and maybe a rec center. And regarding the performance park, how many baseball fields does a city of our size really need vis-a-vis other facilities like lacrosse, soccer, racquetball, and skate parks, things like that?
Yeah, and that's where we did that amenities analysis.
Yeah, that's true. I wrote this before I saw it.
Yeah, sure.
But I was wondering, is that amenity? I guess that amenity analysis is based on what other cities have done, and it's kind of an average, or is that?
Well, so we take what we see in other communities along the Wasatch Front, and then we adjust it after our discussions with city staff, because you guys know what recreation programs you're seeing a need for, like if there are lessons you're not able to fill, or kids that you're having to turn away in certain programs, then we can adjust the that amenities LOS based on that, and so that's where that comes from.
Okay, so it's Wasatch Front, not Chicago or someplace where maybe a certain sport might be more popular than other sports.
Exactly, and that's where even the park area ratio, the National Recreation Parks Association used to set a national standard, and you can still find that information out there, but it's so different out here in the West.
Yeah.
There's so much public land and other things that feed into our needs, and then we also just recreate differently than people around the country. So.
Okay, and then maybe I was wondering, okay, so then I read that, after I read, and then I was wondering, do we compare ourselves to other lakefront or riverfront communities? Because maybe that would be closer to what we are, even compared to other Wasatch Front, I don't know if there's any kind of standards for riverfront or lakefront. Because I guess the planning staff and some city folks, city council folks had done, when we're looking at what to do about our river, our waterfront, and maybe an overlay zones, things like that. They visited other cities that have rivers because they developed the kind of properties and and have the economies that, that we would be more like, instead of someplace like Phoenix or someplace where, it wouldn't have that as much. So I just wonder if that's I shouldn't say Phoenix, I have no idea. But anyway, I just wonder if that would also make a difference in the kind of parks we have.
I mean, the desire for those special use parks did come out in the survey, and then the recommended in the plan, but we didn't get into specifics about, how many you need or where you might need them. Like I said, you have plans for some of those facilities already with the Marina Park and then the coming North Marina Park. But yeah, the plan did not include a comparison to those other communities.
And just wanted to ask, what's a motorized trail? Is it a trail for motorized vehicles? Is that what that is?
ATVs, dirt
Okay.
bikes, yeah.
So we
yeah.
can keep them off the,
It's the other end.
So give them a trail to
Yeah.
keep them out of the park.
That's just for you, Mr. Anderson.
It looks like the willingness for a tax increase is moderate, but $139 indicates what people would pay in annual fees. Is that what that would? So that's different from taxation, right? That's more what they're willing. Is that what that 139 is?
It doesn't specify whether that's a tax increase or whether that's a fee.
I thought we asked a couple questions that asked how much they would be willing to pay annually in relation to.
Let's see, let me look
Yeah,
at the
I don't
question
have it.
specifically, because.
There was a couple questions we asked, because what we wanted to get an idea is, like, if we had to bond for it, how much are you willing to pay? I thought we specifically asked to
Okay.
increase taxes, but I
Let's see.
can't recall.
So one question was.
We're saying.
Right.
So we had a question about how willing residents would be to pay per, let's see, how much would you be willing to pay per year if the additional funding would be used for maintenance or improvements to existing facilities?
So not memberships.
and then
was
this-
the intent of this.
Okay, yeah.
And this was for new facilities for parks, recreation, trails, and open space. And then we did ask a question, how willing are you to support a tax increase to fund the construction
And
of
that
a
was like
recreation center?
60-something%,
That's
right?
the
No.
139.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, that was the 100.
It was, so this was on a scale of 0 to 10, like how willing are you to pay a tax increase? And the average response was 6.5.
Yeah.
And then
it was like
the
60%.
follow-up question was how much would you be willing to pay per year? And that didn't specify whether that was,
Okay,
you
I
know.
see.
Along with that, if I could interject, David, do you recall what the last analysis or estimate was in tax increase to have a rec center?
I don't think we've ever done a formal analysis
No?
before, no. As some comparisons, though, for example, and these are very rough, I can't remember the exact numbers, but, Provo, a few years ago, when they built theirs, it was like 40 million, and now to build it today would be 60 million, just to give you perspective. So even if we did analysis a few years ago, it wouldn't be applicable at all right now, given construction costs. So, Springville, is it Springville that just built a rec center?
Yeah, Springville
Right?
did.
I think theirs was like 23 million, and I can't remember how many square feet, but it's significantly smaller than say, the Provo one, and what they got. So if you think 60 million is what the Provo one is worth now, Springville just built one for 23 million. It's about a third probably of the size.
Yeah, I mean, I asked because I think that's a challenge that the city continues to run up against, is people want these amenities, they don't want to pay for them.
And the
or they
cost
want them
keeps
until they
going
know
up.
how much until they know how much their property tax is going to go up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the performance of the rec centers, where Provo, from what I understand, is performing pretty well, where Lehigh Rec Center is, struggling as far as, financially. And, there's always that debate, I guess. People want it, but they don't want to pay for it when they find out how much it's going to cost and how much it's just going to bleed.
And that's why we asked this question, because, for bonding, it gives the elected officials an idea of to what degree we have to work with if we decide, and any kind of bond, and I don't want to speak in behalf of our elected officials, but, likely would go to a resident to vote for the residents to bond so that the residents can decide. But at least as staff is putting something together, we have an idea of what kind of annual amount gauged, at least build off of, as we're, estimating and doing analysis and things like that. So this gives us that tool, to at least a baseline tool for when we go to look at that more seriously. Oh, sorry, I was going to say, as a side note, backtracking before, just as a reminder, like some of these things in here are conceptual, like Performance Park is a complete concept similar to the city campus. That's a concept, so just keeping some of those things in mind. Sorry, just kind of backtracking some of that.
I would also add too, though, that even though a survey might indicate that they're willing to pay, when it comes down to the actual vote can be different. And
It could be more, it could be less. I mean, our temperament's usually less.
exactly, and we would always recommend a more detailed analysis and study and survey specifically
Right.
focused on a bond. I mean, this is just kind of a general look, but
Right.
you need really good information.
And in your recommendation, you make recommendations for feasibility studies and those sorts of things in here, and that's why.
Yeah.
I mean, I brought it up simply, I guess we understand there's still a disconnect between what they're willing to pay and what they say. Just looking at Provo, this is beyond, property tax increase or whatever they had to do to pay for the rec center. A single person at the Provo Rec Center the membership is $285 a year. For a family, it's $493, and that's on top of any property tax increase. So.
Well, it sounds like a policy decision and a resident vote.
Yes. Sounds like our public relations director, the city needs to do some
Hey,
education of the public
I'm
on
not a
this.
spin doctor, okay? I just put out the facts.
I didn't mean to monopolize the time, but just have one more question. Could you explain on page, what's the page? B1, this is the Appendix B, Open Space Acquisition Tools.
Sure.
Could you please explain what a clustered development is?
So cluster development is where a developer is given additional density so they can cluster on smaller lots, and then you have resulting open space that is preserved around that. So it's a tool to preserve open space, basically. But, one of the kind of drawbacks possibly is that it does create more density, and so the neighboring properties, may not be willing to accept that additional.
Okay, that makes sense now. Thank you. Sorry, that's it for me.
Thanks, Commissioner Kilgore. Commissioner Ryan. Go ahead. You failed miserably, Troy. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lisa. Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to staff as well, and I know there's many that aren't present here this evening that have put a lot of work into this as well. So just want to get on record as saying thanks to all those folks who put a lot of time and thought into this. A lot of the things that I had questions about have already been addressed in one way or another, so I'll try not to be as repetitive as I should be. So I will make note on the needs analysis, particularly towards the southern end of the city. I know, and thankfully, I think it's obviously the right thing to do, but private parks are not counted in that. But there's a large park down there with Stillwater that is technically private, but a lot of those citizens enjoy it, including their ATVs during snow time as well. So we feel Commissioner Anderson's pain as well. But I think that's important to realize in sort of the sense of urgency that we put behind this, that even though they may not be accounted for, they are being used and enjoyed. And I think that's important for citizens as well to understand. I had a question on in the draft report on page 39, and again, this goes along with the park acre ratio. I guess that was, along with Commissioner Kilgore, that was the biggest thing that caught my eyes in years past. It was just kind of a brief mention of saying, hey, it was 5.9 and we didn't meet it. And then there was really kind of no explanation as to some of the mitigating, circumstances or factors that may have contributed to that, whether it was just the explosive population growth that we experienced and other things that have come along in the last, decade or so. But I think we got some good insight as to, I think you shared with us some good insight as to why that number has changed. The thing I have a question about, the table 2.2 is very helpful in comparison with our community and others. We have the 3.72, minimum at build out. Are these, I would be interested in the other communities that are listed. Another factor that I think would be interesting to compare is at what percentage build out these communities are at as well. So you had mentioned like Harriman is something that's comparable, and they're at a 3.6, and that gives us a level of comfort. But then like a St. George is experiencing explosive growth as well, but they're sitting here at a 10. And so for me, I look at this and it's a little disconcerting, because if we get to this 3.72 minimum, and we're looking at some of these other more mature cities that are I would say largely built out, like a Sandy or even Lehigh is comparable to us. I guess that they've experienced a lot of growth, but they're still sitting at a 5.6. So I wonder if there's a way to kind of gauge that, because I think it's important for us to remember that 3.72 is recommended, but that was a recommended minimum. And then I think I read somewhere that it was 3.8 is possible if we do that, and that's a slight bump, but even at 3.8 in comparison to some of these more developed communities, we would still be kind of on the lower scale of all that. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that for us, Lisa.
Yeah, so something to keep in mind, St. George, they are just starting an update to their plan, or they've actually got an RFP out for it. So this is kind of the last number that we have available for that, and it might have changed with all that additional development. And also keep in mind that it's a resort kind of active community, and that's part of their tourism, that's part of their economic development. So my guess is that they're aiming for a really high level anyways. I would be curious to see where it comes out after this general plan or this master plan update for their park system. Provo is one that maybe included some other facilities that are facilities that we wouldn't include. If we were to look at their existing level of service, we wouldn't.
What is the benefit in doing that? Is public perception?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, people want to maybe look like they're providing a higher level than they are. And, if we added in all of your open space to that, a lot of communities, their numbers would be a lot higher. So, and Lehigh, as I mentioned, they're really trying to push the envelope as far as wanting to seek a higher number for their level of service. So they're really trying to.
So it's a conscious decision on their part.
It's part of that, that visioning for the community. That's their goal setting. We've given them kind of a recommendation, but they want to take it and go beyond that. So.
And if I can add to that, I mean, you kind of said it in one point that this is the minimum of what we need. Mm-hmm. So if the council in a policy direction tell us as staff, we want to start pursuing something like what Lehigh's doing, going above and beyond, or we want to become this destination resort community like St. George, then we would make those modifications and we would make head those directions. But what they're providing is to serve our residents along with the growth. This is the base of what you need based on what you're experiencing and what these other plans identify, and looking at it holistically. Does that capture that? Mm-hmm. Well,
exactly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just hope that we all can get on that same page to recognize that 3.72 is a minimum, right? And that we're trying to get it. We would like to excel that minimum.
The plan identifies it as such, doesn't it?
I believe it does, yeah. But it's always easy, like if you're just skimming and you look at that and you say, okay, at build out, we should be at 3.72, right? It's hard to put all the caveats in there.
Yeah, and usually the cost chapter is enough sticker shock, to kind of meet the minimum. So you're welcome to go beyond that. So. And
I think that is, and Commissioner Kilgore hit on this a little bit. We have some unique features, within our city that are not found elsewhere, and so I think there's some things that could drive that for us to find that balance. The other thing that, the chair hit on this, but at the most recent open house, you just mentioned in passing as part of your presentation, there were a lot of comments on the rec center. I wonder, without, obviously having the new draft, if you could expound on, are people making that connection to say, hey, we really want this, but we're willing to foot the bill as well, I guess?
I wouldn't say that.
At $139 willing to pay for a hypothetical, I'm saying no.
I don't think $139 a year is going to pay for it. So there is that disconnect there. People want it, but there's a lot more information.
Was there any vocal opposition? I mean, because it's usually with a rec center, you draw out both sides, right? People that really, really want it but may not understand the connection towards taxes or fees, and then people who really don't want it because they understand the connection to taxes and fees and are entirely opposed to having that be, footed by the city. So were there any people that were starkly in opposition that were coming out to these open houses?
No, but we can hardly call the turnout representative, it was just 30 people.
And
so.
just, what's the word? Basically just unofficial observation through Facebook, managing it, for the last 3 years. I've only seen maybe 2 or 3 comments that I can recall where they're like, why should I have to pay taxes for a service for all of you? Mm-hmm. The majority is, get us a rec center, get us a rec center. Mm-hmm. But I think to Commissioner Chapman's point of when he was saying about the PR guy, if we were to do a feasibility study and analysis and put this bond, or put it up to vote for a bond, that would be incumbent upon us to educate the community on, here's what it would be annually, here's what you've requested, here's why we're doing this, and kind of educate them in that way. But it'll be at that point in which we have to start making that connection for them when the decision-making happens. Because, I mean, we are trying to make steps to educate the public in this and other areas to kind of, when we get to those points, but I think then's the most optimal time to educate them in that sense.
I appreciate that. And then this may be a little cart before the horse, but has the city been approached by any of these, recommended strategic partnerships that we could,
No,
as
I
the school
mean,
district or anyone else, I guess, just for my own benefit
the
and
school
background?
district has said, build us a pool, we need a pool.
Yeah.
And, but there hasn't been any offerings along with that request. But we work with them on a regular basis and, we're trying to think out of the box. Obviously, we were approached by a private entity about doing indoor soccer fields and such. But, we want to do our homework and do it right. So yeah, we're trying to have those discussions, but nothing that's really gained traction or come to fruition, obviously.
That's all I have. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say I'm grateful for the Trailhead for Israel Canyon. I think that'll be great. As an equestrian in the city, we have been pushed out, and so it'll be nice to have some place to park the trailers because we can't just ride from our homes like we used to. So, and then I apologize for speaking out of turn. I just want to emphasize that the parking is the most crucial part of that. So, the other thing that I was curious about is, did you look at utilizing the Welby-Jacob Canal as a trail system?
I believe that we do have trails along some of the canals, and I'm not sure if we've grabbed all of them. We can take an additional
So on your
look at that.
plan, there's very minimal, probably less than a mile. A lot of that's already existing through Harvest Hills, and it goes along the side of the canal. Let me see. That'd be something that could be a big asset, especially if it was similar to the Murdoch Canal Trail. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it runs all the way from Provo to Lehigh. And the Welby-Jacob Canal goes from Camp Williams down to where the temple's gonna be. It's 6 miles. The majority of it is piped and could be a great asset for a canal, for a trail. Also, it would relieve liability from the city. The last 2 years, that canal's flooded. It flooded into Harvest Hills last year, and it flooded the year before that as well. So having open water running through the city isn't the greatest thing for the city either.
I know cities, councils has been in discussions with potentially piping it.
And that would be
I don't know where that's
phenomenal. That would be phenomenal. And it releases liability and increases capacity, and it's just and we could add the trails. So I think that's good. Also, just most of it is already piped now. It's flat, it's gravel. It'd be easy to put a trail on, and you might be able to partner with the canal company because the canal company wants it piped as well. I know I've talked to the canal company about piping it. So that's my push for that canal, and I ride bikes, so I like bike trails. That's, I think, everything I have on my notes.
Thanks, Commissioner Wagstaff. The gentleman from Grandview is recognized.
I just want to
Your time,
I
Bryce.
just want to follow up with what Commissioner Ryan said, and that was, you mentioned Taylorsville as this example of buying up land early. I grew up right next to that regional park. That's something about mean parks, okay. I will tell you though, you go into Taylorsville, everyone has a 1/4 acre. Now you're building houses by the block where they're all 0.1 acres, right? So to say 3.7 is enough, I think, and what some of these other communities have, maybe Taylorsville does have 3.7, but they also have a whole lot more 1/4 acre house lots. Does that make sense? They're not crammed together in these bunny cages. So, anyway, just more fodder for it. I just wanted to pile on, that's all.
Sorry, can I say one?
Commissioner Ryan.
Sorry, and I guess that it doesn't have to be part and parcel with this, but that would be really, really interesting to see, like, where these cities are at percent build out and where this final number of theirs is resting. I think that would give us a much clearer picture than just this two-column comparison, if we had a third column to say, this is a percentage of build out that they are at and the number that they are maintaining. Does that make sense? Does that request make sense? Or even is that information available? I'm guessing it would be if you could do a little digging.
It would take some time to kind of find that information out, yeah.
Thanks.
Commissioner Kilgore and then Commissioner Cunningham.
And then also one of your comments actually triggered something else. I thought it was a really good point about, the relative build-outs of each city when we compare ourselves to those cities. But that then made me think, you had what was it called, a pinpoint map? Or yeah,
pinpoint.
and it talked about where the survey, people who answered the surveys came from in the city. And I was just wondering if it would make a difference if a person comes from a development that has a lot of HOA amenities, So like I live in a development that has 2 pools, and we pay for that already, through our HOA fees. And so if some of the new communities that are coming on that's going to have dog parks and it's going to have really nice kind of amenities, even though there are in a more densely packed homes, but they'll have those communities. So I just wonder if we have more HOA folks or people who are in HOAs with those communities, if they're actually going to be kind of negative towards any additional increases in cost or things like that. So I just wonder if that's something that you would also take a look at as we develop further, or maybe in the future, or if you've already done that.
We haven't done that specifically. Typically, when you do a statistically valid survey, that company can do those breakouts. The people living in this neighborhood have this sort of a response to this question. We don't have that capability with the survey that we conducted. But that would not be surprising that if somebody, lived in an HOA that had those amenities, that they wouldn't be in favor of additional taxes to pay for those types of facilities.
Yeah, because I think about myself and living in I think I'd be really okay with this, especially, I'm thinking, typically I should be thinking that I don't want a tax increase because I already have those amenities, so I'd be open to a fee-based. But at the same time, I want the city itself to be nicer and, or not nicer, but just develop in that kind of a direction, having the beach, things like that. So it's actually something that I would actually prefer. It would be a tax type of thing. So maybe it doesn't make a difference, but I just wonder, if there is some skew based on, where the resident comes from when they do the survey.
I would imagine that there would be, and you're going to have people on both sides of that see what they already pay for and they don't want to pay for anybody else, or people that are more community-minded and say, we should be serving the community at large. But, you also have situations like the Acre Recreation and Parks District. That's a special overlay assessment area. And so you have parts of West Jordan, Taylorsville, West Valley, and West Jordan, and then plus unincorporated areas of the community that pay an extra tax specifically to fund these recreation facilities. And so, if the city bonds for something like a recreation center on the west side in West Jordan, then some of those residents are already paying for, other taxes for this special assessment area. So you do run into those conflicts in other locations.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you.
Uncommon, yeah.
That's also why you put it to a vote, because some of those nuances surface through a vote.
Commissioner Cunningham.
First off, I'd like to say, to thank Lisa for your presentation, but also I really like how the draft master plan was laid out. It was visually appealing to go through. I liked how the layout was, the graphs in there were really appealing. The way you presented the information, it was easy to read. I also like this information in the appendix, including the back and forth with the equestrian center and then also the parks director. I guess I'm becoming a real strange person to actually like to read this kind of stuff.
It's called planning nerd.
Okay.
It's fine, we accept it.
Let the record show that Commissioner Cunningham read the
Appendixes.
appendices.
Yeah. I had one question on, let's see if I can get this. No, it's not letting me tap here. On page 15, there, facility needs, wants, skate park. But one of the things, the comment that stuck out to me was fields converted to artificial turf to ease impact. What impact are we talking about? Is that like water use or?
ATVs on parks.
Let's see. So I guess what that can accomplish is that when you have natural turf fields and they get heavy use, then the city has to rotate programming on those fields in order
Okay.
to give them a rest, so that they don't just completely die out or have major issues. So that's part of it, is just the use impact. And then when you have an artificial turf field, you can also extend your season. You can extend further into the winter months, like Park City, they have artificial turf fields up at Quinn's Junction, and they plow in the spring and the winter, so they can extend their season to get the kids on the fields. So there's.
The other thing I can remember when we were talking about artificial turf in one of our planning commissions is that they can get really hot.
Yes.
So how do they limit the time that can be used, or do they like water them down, or?
There are a lot of pros and cons with artificial turf fields. It's definitely not recommending them per se. It's just an option to consider, because there are the heat issues, and Park City is a little higher, so that helps a little bit. But there are also health concerns, with the materials of the artificial turf fields getting into the lungs of players, or the impact on joints of youth playing on the fields. So there's a lot of things to consider. But they also have this benefit for saving water and extending your season and that type of thing.
Okay, now I've got to page 41, and also on page 44, there's maps. And it talks about, when I was looking at the, comparing I wanted to see what the different parks were. So I noticed there was 2 number 6s. I think one of those number 6, okay.
We have
So
some
you're-
errors to fix on those, yes.
All right, cool. Just wanted to make sure you're aware of that.
Yes, thank you.
And then the last thing that I had, which I thought was interesting, and this is probably more for the planning commission, or the planning director who's not here, was that the parks superintendent had mentioned that he wanted more coordination between planning and them on the materials and stuff that's put into the parks. And I was under the impression we did that, because I can remember there was a couple times we were talked about, it was specifically in the city code where we were requiring certain types of sprinkler system parts to be used, and then also playground equipment. They needed to use, I think it was 2 or 3 different brands. So his comment kind of took me by surprise. So does that stuff not run through them when they propose a city-maintained plan?
I don't know what context he had put that in.
Yeah, and maybe it's a matter of just, I don't know, he should be aware of those different brands and those different materials, but I'm thinking it's more in context of historically, we've not always had the exact same standards as the, city is built, and so you find some of those discrepancies and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That's something that we need to make sure we identify and is communicated, and I think that's probably why he brought that up.
I just want to make sure we have a process in place when a big development is going to put in a park for us, that they make sure that the materials are
Yeah, and
proposed.
so I've recently, I'll take Mallard Bay, for example, because I'm doing that site review right now. And so I've had to go back through like the preliminary plan. And when Sarah had done the preliminary review on that and the open space plan and the park plans, because there's 2 parks in that development on the lake. And so she did make comments in regards to the type of play equipment and that type of thing. So I believe that's happening. I don't know what I can't speak for the Parks Department and what their input would be. And I don't know what Dave had meant by that comment, so. But it is happening. We are looking at those things.
Yeah, and that was from our focus interview with Rick, and I think he just wanted to make sure that they're getting their eyes on those
Right.
documents too. And
Right.
That's all I had, thanks.
So I just have a few things. One is just, what is the city's current budget with, like the maintenance and building of trails? And did you do anything in your thing to look at if that's if we have a massive deficit or if we're planning accordingly.
I mean, in this process, we didn't identify, you know, you can look at the overall parks department's budget, but I don't think we, for this process, identified what segment goes into, you know, what amount goes into cutting lawns versus repaving asphalt or any of those sorts of playground equipment. But I think some of that could probably be delineated through the parks budget or figured out, but we didn't go through that in this process.
But essentially, by 2060, the city has to allocate $124,957,000 to do what you're talking about. Is that
Well,
correct?
where do you live again? Harvest Aspen Hills?
Aspen Hills?
Yeah, we were thinking of doing a special service district right around where your house is at.
You can double it up because the canal's right there too.
Just teasing.
So the plan does have a section on funding options. So we do provide different resources for different types of projects. Typically for those larger facilities like a recreation center, you need to go for a bond. But we've also heard of cities that have, say they're wanting to build a facility like that, and they decide to break it up in pieces and then just go for what they can fund with impact fees or something like that, and then phase it. But you don't save money in the long run doing that way because of the cost of development. I mean, it's not only land costs, it's development costs that are going up. So, if you can at all do what you want from the beginning, that's usually the best way.
I think some of it too is, maintenance costs and capital costs, obviously they fluctuate over time, generally increase in fluctuation. And so that's why, as a city, we budget the year, but we also plan the budget 5 years in advance to accommodate for those costs and take those things into consideration. So, for example, if we know we spend X number of dollars on trails just for maintenance right now, but we know X items are going up in cost, we can accommodate that for that during the budget request period, if that makes sense.
Maybe if Commissioner Carn has started his reelection campaign, we can put some pressure on him. I think this is tremendous work, and one of the things I remember in the vision statement, or the whole Saratoga Springs vision, was about things that make us unique. And part of what made us unique was the waterfront in the Jordan River. And one of the things that came up as a huge section of that is the trail network. And there's not a lot of communities that I've seen or know of that have as extensive dedication to a trail network and a walkable community and a bike riding community is Saratoga Springs. And so if we're trying to be unique, I certainly think this is something that will continue to help us be unique, and make it a more active community. So I just applaud the city on their work and appreciate the presentation as well, Lisa. With that, let's entertain a motion.
I move to forward a positive recommendation to the City Council on the 2020 update to the Parks, Trails, Recreation, and Open Space Master Plan.
Second.
Motion by Kilgore, second by Cunningham. Discussion of the motion. There was a couple of things that we had mentioned that I suppose can just be in the notes, but I just want to make sure that they're there. There was the 2 number 6s, that's just kind of a typo. But there were the notable things. There was the fix to page 40 with the preclude language. But there was also the power line corridor that you were going to work with Shelley on, just to make sure. And so I don't think we need to change the motion. I just want to make sure that's noted as it moves on to City Council. Any other discussion of the motion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks, City. Moving on to item number 5, approval of minutes, January 9, 2020. Any corrections, additions, deletions?
Give someone else
Okay.
a chance.
Do we have a motion?
You didn't get my Kung Pao chicken.
Anybody? This is an easy one.
I'll go.
I move
Oh, yeah, are we just looking for a motion?
that we approve the minutes from the January 9th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting.
Okay, motion by Cunningham,
I'll second.
second by Barton. Any discussion of the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Commission comments? Anyone? Okay, director's report.
So the next, Dave's not here, he will be back on Monday. But on the February 13th meeting, we have tentatively, we have the Saratoga Town Center site plan. We haven't received that back yet. They have to resubmit some red lines. Fox Hollow is tentative as well, for a master plan development agreement amendment and rezone. And then Wander is definitely going to be on here. So as for the 13th, we don't have anything as of the 27th. Dave, do you want to say anything about the earlier meeting
Which meeting?
with the council?
Today's special meeting?
Yeah,
Today,
address that.
yeah, the city council held a special meeting today. If you're not aware, the planning staff and myself for the last 3 or 4 months have been going through our use table of conditional uses and trying to get rid of conditional uses and just make things permitted. And obviously, there were some conditional uses we were going to retain or recommend, but for the most part, we were trying to simplify the code. Well, the council decided to just hold a special meeting and made the motion and unanimously approved the motion to simply do away with all conditional uses. And now the directive for planning staff and myself will be to now go through what we've already been going through for the last 3 or 4 months in the use table, but identify those conditional uses that we were going to retain, get rid of them, and determine where those uses need to go to be permitted and establish criteria with those uses. I mean, that's everything from, home occupations to restaurants to a variety of things in every zone, so.
So just to clarify on that a little bit, the council, they approved, what they amended in our code was that all home occupations or conditional uses on our residential table are permitted, home occupations especially. And then we are working on the conditional uses within the commercial use table. So that is to allow for home occupations. If you look at chapter 1908, it already has a standard for home occupations. I think that was one of the biggest concerns with that, is to not put some of those homeowners on hold until we get these tables updated. And so essentially they approved us to recommend to you a updated table.
So sexually oriented businesses are permitted in all industrial zones then?
So anything in commercial, all the conditional use permits that, conditional uses that are on the commercial use table currently are on stay. So basically, until we get this pending, this is a pending ordinance. So any application that comes in right now, the council has made an executive decision to stay any commercial use, conditional use permits until we get the table updated. As far as the residential uses, conditional uses, they said those are all permitted. Okay. In the meeting today, and you can watch that YouTube, I believe, later. Later. So
any applications that have site plan and all of that already are vested under what those applications were. What else was I going to add? Oh, just to make sure we're clear on the lingo, this is happening under pending ordinance. This is not a moratorium. So just make sure in any discussions about this that you don't use that language. This is under the pending ordinance doctrine.
Utah State Code allows the council to do that. If there is a pending ordinance, applications can be put on hold. So if anybody right now currently comes in with a conditional use permit for a commercial use, we would, as staff, we would tell them there is a pending ordinance. We cannot review your application until the ordinance has.
And any applications that have been received that are just concept, that are affected by this pending ordinance, we will be contacting to work with them.
Correct.
And help them decide how they would like to move forward and how staff will work with them to, you know, make amends for the pending ordinance of what's going on, so. And make amends isn't probably the best way to say it, but, you know, reconcile the situation, given the pending ordinance, so.
Okay.
Any
anything-
questions on that?
Mr. Johnson, you're here. Director Johnson, would you like to give us a report on any of your activities?
Well, I went running the other day, 7 30-minute miles.
trail?
Actually, on the trail, yes, from Inlet Park over to the Lehigh Park and back. No, I'm just being smart. I did do that, though. You know, I don't have anything as of right now that can be discussed, I guess. Obviously.
No hypotheticals, no.
No hypotheticals, no. I mean, if you didn't know, Costco's coming. Actually, one thing you should be aware of, and we just put it on Facebook tonight during this meeting, is Market Street will be closed next week in conjunction with infrastructure being put in preparation for Costco. So that's actually one thing to be aware of.
I would imagine with Costco announcing, it has garnered more interest in the city.
It has. Nothing that's come to fruition. I think things are bubbling up, though. I can definitely say that in the last 6 months, I've seen a lot more bubbling up, because even before Costco was formally announced, I mean, Costco was, before we could even say it publicly, Costco was telling everyone the employees were, and of course, realtors and stuff were talking, and I was getting approached. And anyways, long story short, yeah, things are definitely bubbling up a lot more, and I'm definitely feeling the workload more with it, so, yeah. So it's encouraging,
That's good job security.
yeah.
Costco just helped guarantee you a job.
Well, they'll also take all my money as well once they open, so.
Okay, any motion to discuss Commissioner Anderson's professional competence? No? Apparently one of the reasons we can do item 8, just to discuss somebody's character, professional competence, physical, mental health. No?
Closed session.
Okay, without objection, we adjourn.